Welcome back. We have with us on Zoom Professor Atish Dabholkar, Director ICTP. Uh, Thank you, Professor Dabholkar, for agreeing to give a talk today in this occasion. So he's going to talk about science in the developing world, two visions for the future.
Okay, so good evening, everybody. I'm happy to be. Okay, can I start?
Yes, please. Yeah. Please start.
Okay. Sorry, it's. I wish I was there in person. I think there is a echo somewhere. Okay. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine. Are you finding an echo at your end from our system?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you, but I think there is when I speak, there is an echo.
Oh, when you speak, there's an echo. Okay.
Okay, but I will ignore that echo if you are not hearing that echo.
Yeah, we are not hearing the echo.
I think there is some time delay. So okay, very good. I think what happens is that somehow I hear back what I'm saying, but it's okay. After some time, it's fine. Now there is no echo. Can you hear me now? It's good.
Yes, we can hear you well. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you for. It's a pleasure to be here for this. Also, there is a lag between the two images, so I hope only one image is projected.
We can see you. Yeah, we don't see any lag.
Extend. Okay, very good. Thank you for inviting me to this celebration. It's a pleasure to be back at IMSC, even if on Zoom. Because last time when I was there, I talked about Ramanujan and quantum black holes. That was the technical talk. But then also there was a public lecture about scientific temper and so on. So I think I have very good memories. And I wish I could be there in person. But unfortunately, I cannot be there in person. This time I would like to talk about, not about a technical topic, but something about science in developing countries, which I would like to share with you, especially because Allade Ramakrishnan played a very important role in building institutions like IMSC, along with many others, luminaries in India, including Bhabha at the Tata Institute and the Atomic Energy, as well as Saha and Raman. So there was a whole generation of major scientists who decided to devote themselves to building the scientific community in India. And this was post-independence India. So I think it's a good time to ask, where do we stand after 60 years or more than 60 years now, 75 years. And what should be the road ahead? And in this context, I wanted to present having been now both at Tata Institute for many years and at International ICTP, International Center for Theoretical Physics in Trieste. At both places, I have spent almost 10 years now. And I wanted to ask this question about the future of all our efforts towards developing a scientific community in a country like India, and which I suppose was close to the heart of Allade Ramakrishnan, but also I think it's close to the heart of all of us. That how do we strengthen the scientific community and take it to the next level? So the two visions that I wanted to talk about is that one vision is, of course, the one shared by Allade Ramakrishnan and Bhabha and Saha, which is what I think the ultimate goal is to create a strong, self-reliant scientific community in India or in Africa or in China, in all the countries around the world, coming out of the colonial rule. This was the vision when India became independent, that science is a very important, is a very kind of a glorious heritage of humankind. Indian civilization has made many important contributions in the past, but somehow the colonial rule had intervened to break this tradition and in a way making India dependent on external production of science, which was fundamentally detrimental to our plans for becoming an independent nation. And therefore, together with the political institutions like the parliament and the judiciary system, it was equally important to develop these scientific institutions in the country. And that goal, I think, was a very laudable goal. And I think many of the people that I mentioned really devoted their time and energy and thinking to this very important project. And I think it's fair to say that some of the goals and objectives that they set for themselves, to have a strong enough local community of scientists, which are essentially can function without any external communications effectively. I mean, it's sufficiently large enough, it has the critical mass to be self-reliant, very good institutions, working conditions for scientists. Some of these, then also we have our space programs, Sarabhai, we have nuclear energy programs. So many of these goals, I would say, have been achieved. And I think, therefore, for the next generation, the question would be, as the leaders of the scientific community for the next generation in India, where do we go from here? And what should be our next goals and objectives? The second vision that I want to talk about has to do with, and I saw this actually very closely working myself in India. I was very keen to work in India, and Tata Institute offered a wonderful opportunity to really do world-class research living in India. And the community that we have in a number of fields in India is really at the top of their field and comparable to any other community in the world. So this already is a very big accomplishment, and it clearly has had a big impact also indirectly on Indian society, even though supersymmetry and black holes don't immediately translate into what we do on the street. The broad vision of creating a community of scientific knowledge was very well justified and has been implemented to a large extent. The second vision that I wanted to talk about is the vision that I experienced after moving to ICTP. And of course, I knew about ICTP even before being there as a director. But this, I would say, is the vision of Salam. And he was, in a way, forced into it. It was partially out of compulsion that he himself wanted to create a similar community in Pakistan. But the political and economic conditions, also cultural conditions in Pakistan, were not quite as suitable for Salam. He did not find a very strong stalwart like Jawaharlal Nehru, who could really fund fully put his weight behind the Prime Minister, behind the scientific community. So some of these things, India was really fortunate to have this kind of leadership that we had, who understood the importance of science and who understood, even for a developing country, considering all the other very important priorities of development, that some fraction of national investment must go into even high-level science. This understanding was fundamental for the project in India to succeed. Unfortunately for Salam, this was not the case, and he had to leave Pakistan. And his vision was therefore to create an international hub for science, where scientists from all over the world can come together. And he was also, in a way, trying to address the same question that the pioneers of Indian science were trying to address in India, namely how to end the intellectual isolation of scientists in regions of the world where the communities are not large enough. And India's answer was to create such a community so that there is no intellectual isolation. But this is not always possible. And therefore, Salam's vision was to create an international center where scientists from all over the world can gather and really get in touch with the latest knowledge and latest developments in their field, really interact with the best people working in their field, and have this opportunity to recharge their batteries and then return and then contribute to their communities back home. And I would say that ICTP has also been very successful. I mean, this project was very well realized, I would say. So today, ICTP, in the last so many years, ICTP has welcomed close to 200,000 scientists from something like 180 countries around the world. And about 2/3 of them are from developing countries. And they are fully funded by ICTP. And every year we get 7,000 scientists to attend various schools and very high-level conferences, about 60 of them every year. And in this way, ICTP's mission has become to promote excellence around the world by making science more inclusive. And you make it more inclusive by really, open science has become a slogan now, but it was really like with CERN, really making science, or perhaps even more than CERN, making science really openly available to disadvantaged regions of the world. Because oftentimes, more than even gender and ethnicity, geography can be the biggest hurdle of exclusion, I mean, towards inclusion. And ICTP's mission was to address this need around the world. And a related mission was to promote international cooperation and international understanding through science. And this second part of the mission is also very important. And I want to come back to it later. So these are sort of the two quite different ways about addressing, to go about addressing this question about creating scientific communities around the world and making science globally available. So when I became the director of ICTP, I asked myself this question. What is the, and I also asked myself the same question when I was in India at Tata Institute, that what is the relevance of what we are doing today? Or what is the relevance of our scientific institutions? Or what is the role, rather than saying the relevance, what is the role for our scientific institution in the coming years? And likewise, what is the role for a place like ICTP in the coming years? And this is what I want to share with you in the remaining few minutes. That the conclusion was that I would regard these two visions as being really complementary to each other. In fact, if you read some of the history, it's quite interesting. Salam and Bhabha actually didn't really get along with each other. And they were, in a way, competing for this in their views. And it was understandable at that time. But if I now take a look at it from the current vantage point, I came to the conclusion that one should really regard these two missions as being very complementary. Because, and this I can really speak from my own experience, since I have seen it from both sides, that ICTP, so I asked myself, is ICTP relevant for countries like India or China or Brazil or South Africa, the BRIC countries? And is ICTP relevant for countries in Africa? And it's clear that India and China and Brazil and South Africa are no longer what they used to be in the 1960s. And they are themselves very strong economic powers, and they have their very highly developed scientific communities. So therefore, the role of ICTP cannot be exactly the same as it used to be. But I became convinced that, in fact, and also talking to a lot of young people and researchers, and from my own experience, I'm quite convinced that ICTP's mission remains valid, even more so in today's world than it was in the 60s. But it has to be implemented in a different way. Namely, that we are now can really engage with countries like the BRIC countries as an equal partnership, rather than in the way we were engaging with the countries in the past. What do I mean by this? That so just to give an example of India, from my own experience, I can say, even though I was at Tata Institute, it was always a wonderful experience to go to ICTP and to be able to spend 2 months as an associate or as a visitor, really completely decoupled from all other responsibilities, and do research and talk to people and to attend some major conferences. And it was really a much, in a way, cost-effective way of getting to know the latest developments in your field than going to a place, let's say in the US, like Aspen, or to New York or something like that, or to Paris. And I think this remains true even today. I mean, over the years, ICTP had contributed something like 15 million euros to scientists in India, something like 10,000 scientists such as myself and many others really benefited in their careers from being at ICTP. And I think that role continues to be valid even today. But I feel that perhaps we should now think of better ways to engage with these countries. And one such initiative that I have started, and I believe that this could be very important and interesting for India. For example, we recently signed an agreement with South Africa, the National Center for Computational Sciences and High Performance Computing. So it was signed at the level of the ministerial level, and South Africa actually committed certain amount of money to ICTP, about $500,000 spread over a few years, euros. And the idea being that even though the South African community is now well developed, many young people still would benefit from having exposure, an international exposure. And rather than sending them somewhere else, they can actually form partnerships with ICTP and get a much better way of offering this international scientific exposure. And essentially, because if South Africa is putting X amount of money, ICTP is essentially putting in Y amount of money. So it's really a mutually beneficial win-win solution for both parties. Because for us to go from, we do selections for various scientists, and to go from, if you usually get 5 times more applications than we can accommodate. And if there is additional funding available from the governments, then it becomes very easy for us to increase the number of, let's say, scientists coming from South Africa. And this is the model that I think could be a good one for the years to come. I signed a similar agreement with Arab Fund to cater to the Arab countries. They will give us 600,000 euros. And I think with India, it makes a lot of sense. India has fellowships like ACRB, which allow you to travel to other places for international exposure. But they are oftentimes quite bureaucratic and difficult to actually use. So some kind of a partnership with India could be very beneficial. Now, coming back to the role of the scientific institutions in India. So I think this, I believe, remains a role for an institution like ICTP. The second very important role is international cooperation, because as I wanted to give this example, now the problems in the 60s were primarily, of course, science and nuclear energy and possibly nuclear risks. These problems remain with us, but we also have now climate risks and some different questions about sustainability, or what are you going to do with artificial intelligence. And here, it is really important that India is part of some international dialogue. And this is really an international question without borders, and where the role, again, a partnership between a major scientific community like an Indian scientific community and ICTP could be useful. Just to give an example, a few years ago, where the climate scientists working on, let's say, the monsoon. If you look at the monsoon, it's basically a boundary value problem to solve the Navier-Stokes equation. The Himalayas is the boundary. And the boundary value problem does not care about national boundaries. So whether India and Pakistan get along with each other, or China and India get along with each other, is really not a concern for the monsoon. But as you can imagine, it was impossible for Indian and Chinese climate scientists, or Pakistani and Indian and Nepali Chinese climate scientists to come together on a platform and share data and discuss the regional climate models. And one of the important such monsoon conferences took place a few years ago at ICTP. So this is a kind of partnership that can be really useful, that now the Indian climate community has resources is not a problem, but offering an international forum where they can actually collaborate with the international community and with their neighbors. This could be one area where this could be a very interesting partnership. Finally, coming to Indian institutions, I think, and this has also been recognized, that by compulsion perhaps, in the 60s, the focus, as with IMSC and TIFR, was to create research institutes which were somehow separated and somehow, insulated from the university system. And I think this has been recognized. I'm not the first one to say this, that it's really important to move slowly towards the model of a research university, as we are already doing in India with ICERs and so on, where you remove this insulation and create a better thermal contact between the research institutes and teaching institutions, because ultimately you cannot carry out research in isolation where it is completely divorced from interaction with students. So I think this is clearly one area where the vision perhaps for the future should be a little bit different than what it was 75 years ago. And another area where, again, is a similar one for ICTP is that scientific computing now is going to become extremely important. And at ICTP, we have started this initiative called the International Consortium for Scientific Computing. And I'm wondering, and there is a national consortium for scientific computing, the one that I talked about, let's say in places like South Africa. And I'm wondering whether India has such an effort, because I'm a paper and pencil physicist, but it's clear that 10 years down the line, these tools are going to be so fundamentally important that any notion of open science and availability to science must include a notion of open access to computing. And it just doesn't mean now, I mean, it really means that you are training people, offering the resources to, let's say, how to do GPU programming or how to use machine learning methods for solving all kinds of problems. And ICDP certainly regards this as its obligation to try to create such a consortium. And once again, I think if India has similar efforts in this direction, I think for the Indian scientific community is very robust and well established, and I'm sure there is some discussion going on along these directions. And collaboration with the Indian scientific community on this front, I believe, would also be very useful, both for the Indian scientific community and for ICTP, to create some kind of an international, because even problems like climate, if you want to have regional climate models now, very high resolution climate models are being made around the world. But how to adapt them to predict, let's say, some local policy decisions about, let's say, monsoon and the production of hydroelectricity and so on, requires a well-trained set of people who are actually using these modern techniques like GPU programming or whatever is new techniques are being used. So I think this, once again, here, in international contact is very important, even for a strong local scientific community like the Indian scientific community. And so I look at, this is my summary, that these are the two visions of which started on two very different paths, somewhat different paths. But I feel that going forward in the next 50 years, perhaps both these visions can be complementary to each other and can benefit from each other. And so I would stop here. I would leave you with this thought.
Thank you, Professor Dabholkar. Now the session is open for questions.
Professor Dabholkar, thank you for sharing your thoughts. I had a question that, in particular, during the COVID times, we all learned to work through online media. That has also made scientists at distance, those who are even reluctant to collaborate, made them effective collaborators at a distance. Do you see in post-COVID times any further scope of collaborations or new ways of collaborations between ICTP and other countries in the region?
Sorry, I had difficulty hearing this question, so could somebody repeat this question?
So I said that in the COVID times, we all learned to essentially work remotely through Zoom and other media. So has that experience anyways influenced future decisions of how ICTP could collaborate with India and other such countries?
No, I think, as you all know, ICTP it was a big challenge for ICTP because we are fundamentally an international place. We had many scientists. As you know, the COVID hit Italy, that region of Italy, the worst in the beginning. And we actually had several scientists on our campus. We had to repatriate them. It was very difficult because flights were canceled and people were closing the borders. But I think, so we came out of this experience, I would say, ICTP handled this extremely well. And we took some important strategic decisions. So just to give you one example, we had to decide whether to bring in our master students, because we have about 100 master students from, I don't know, 50, 60 countries. And what should we do with them? Should we just teach them on Zoom remotely? And we took the decision to bring them to ICTP campus. And because our guest houses were not being used, we used them as a student guest house. So they were in a way in a quarantine. They could not actually leave their room. They could not even go down to the sea or something like that. We had to supply them food in their own room. And the classes also could not be held really in person. They were listening to the classes on Zoom. So you could ask, and in a way they were like being in a prison. And ICTP had big, difficult challenges. So we had to, I remember there were 10 students who wanted halal food. We had to address all these issues because they could not actually go to and I'm quite happy that we actually brought those students there, and we graduated more than 200, 300 students that way from many countries. Because the problem is that in many places, Zoom is not even available. Sorry. So in many places, the reason we did this was because Zoom resources, there is a big divide also in terms of availability of connectivity. And all said and done, even if they could see their lecturers remotely or once in a while, it has a different effect than they being somewhere in Ethiopia and not just connecting every day in Zoom. And when we reopened after COVID, it was quite impressive that people were really fed up with this online thing. We actually conducted the same number of activities during the COVID years, and more than our usual 6,000 people participated. But when we restarted, it was very important that this in-person interaction is extremely important for science. And I really don't see a way that we can substitute it by just Zoom conferences. However, what has happened is that it can actually go more towards hybrid. And this is the path that we will follow. That in the past, the people that suppose we were able to select only 200 students because of the resources, but if we had, say, 300 qualified students, then now our policy, that's the policy we are trying to follow now. We still have to do some work on that. Rather than not accepting the remaining 100, we can accept them for remote attendance where it is possible. So I think by doing this hybrid thing, we can increase the number of people we reach out to. But I don't think completely online activity is a real substitute for what we want to do.
Professor Dabholkar, your vision about having a collaboration about computational sciences with ICTP, do you envision it to happen at the government level, or you can also think of having it with the institution levels also?
Yeah, so my experience is that, see, at the time of Salam, there were many institutional agreements, but my experience is that institutional agreements take a lot of work and they're much more difficult to implement. Whereas if you make a larger agreement at the level of the country or the funding agency, then it is relatively easy to implement. This is also true for SERB and the Indo-French. I had some experience with the Indo-French grants. The bureaucracy becomes a lot more complicated if it's really one-to-one. Whereas if you have some amount of funding available from the Indian government or Indian funding agency, DST or whoever, then it's very easy for us because we are doing our selections as we normally do. So we can ensure quality. And typically we have a lot more students from our scientists, not students, scientists from India that we can accommodate. And so it's relatively easy for us to say that, okay, from our own money, we can take only 5 scientists. But since now this additional grant is available, we can take 5 more, or maybe 2 more. And that kind of an increase is relatively easy for ICTP to implement. And that, I think, is a more effective and more useful model. This is not to say that the institutional, we do have agreements with institutions, and they can happen. But I think a broader national level agreement is more effective. We have had something similar with Korea, for example. Korea is not considered a developing country. But in the subjects of string theory, we had some agreement with the Asia Pacific Center. They used to give us some fixed amount of money, like 25,000 euros. And then we could therefore select, let's say, 10 Korean scientists to attend our conferences. Even though Korea is not a developing country, really, since we had this agreement, it was a relatively easy thing to implement. So I think my answer would be that yes, we can do. We are open to institutional agreements, but it's really much more useful if it can be, and much simpler to implement. See, I mean, if you just now count the number of IITs, you have a large number of IITs and large number of ICERs. It's not really practical to have an agreement with each IIT and each ICER. But if you have a pot of money, which is open to any scientist from the DST institution, then they can come to ICT for activities. So I'm more inclined towards this model than doing individual agreements.
Professor Dabholkar, I'm not a scientist. I'm a supporter of science. You made a mention of universities giving way to specialized institutions in India at a particular point of time, and you would like probably universities to be strengthened now. Am I right?
Sorry, I cannot hear well again. Maybe.
I will repeat. Okay. At one point of time.
Maybe.
At one point, you made a mention that India shifted its focus from the universities to national laboratories like TIFR, CSIR, and so on. Probably, would you like the focus to be again shifted to the universities? Is that the case you want to make? Maybe someone else can repeat it.
It would be good if somebody can repeat this question.
Yeah.
Maybe there was some breakage. Maybe somebody can repeat this question.
Yeah.
I think previously I could hear better.
Yes, Professor Dabholkar. Yeah, this is Krishnaswamy Alladi here. He is asking that you initially mentioned that the Indian government shifted its focus from universities to institutes like the Tata Institute and other research institutes. His question is, are you now saying that the time has come to go back and put the focus in universities? That's his question.
I would say so. I mean, I know that funding is always an issue, and there is a danger that you waste the limited. I think that was the reason why in India or also in France, for example, they created the CNRS with a similar kind of argument that if you have limited funds and you want to have an impact, then you try to insulate it and not put it in a very diffusive system. But I think in the long run, this is not a good science policy, in my opinion. And one has to move towards, and I think ICER is a very good example. I think ICER is the right move in that direction, where you really bring in research and education together. And I think one of the successes, I would say, of the American scientific system or the Anglo-Saxon model is the research university. And I think that's a good model to follow.
The problem of the specialized institutions is one of social responsibility. You see, what happens, I'm sure you must have read Ajanta Subramaniam's book about IITs. Okay, what happens is, in the name of meritocracy, you leave out the millions of our village people, and you only get the elites into these colleges. And India is full of people from the rural areas. And we city folks occupy IISCRs, IITs, IISCs, IMSC, and all. How many rural guys are here? Very few. So that is not a great model for India. We have to educate people. The other day in the parliament, a former minister said, Class 8 students are unable to read class 2 textbooks. That is the level of education you provide your countrymen or country children. Now you are talking about bringing back that kind of education and providing to all universities. The universities are not doing well. That's the problem now. Universities are advertising, full-page advertisements giving ranks, come to my college. And that college, the one that is near Madras, has been shown in a Nature article to have fudged all its papers recently. There's a paper from one of the editors of Retraction Watch stating that this college has indulged in such practice. And they are advertising full page in Hindu and Times of India. That is the status of education that we have. So the conditions here, the social conditions, are not conducive for the kind of things you are talking about. That's what I'm saying. So we have to do a lot of other things. So maybe I should write to you later on. Yeah.
So are you able to hear him properly?
Not yet.
Professor Dabholkar, were you able to hear
I could
his...
understand.
Were you able to hear
maybe
his
you can
comment
summarize?
and question properly? Or do you want it to be repeated?
You can summarize the question, because I sort of got what he was saying, but not really, because there was noise.
So his observation is the Indian universities are in a somewhat pathetic state. But if we focus on elite institutions like the Tata Institute or IMSC or places like that, you're not really serving the masses. The responsibility is to uplift, from an educational point of view, the people in the villages, the rural segment. And these elite institutes are not able to do that. Universities can do it, but the universities are in a very poor state. So he says that even though you are talking about things going back to the university, it may not be yet possible in India until we make sure that the university situation is better.
No, I agree. I agree with that. There is a well-known educationist, J.P. Naik. I know him. He has said about this the elusive triangle of quality, equality, and quantity. And this challenge remains. He was talking about primary education in India, how to ensure quality, equality, and quantity, because you need to sort of go in all these three axes. And we have resources to go only so far in one of these directions. Yeah, so I don't want to suggest that these are easy challenges. And I'm not offering some simple solution. But I think one has to make an attempt and take stock of how our investments are happening in science and education, and rethink this model is what I'm saying. Yeah, I think all these points that you have raised are completely valid and well taken.
Okay. As there are no further questions, let's thank the speaker. Thank you again for joining us for the celebration. Thank you.
I cannot hear you.
I said,
cannot. You're muted. You're muted.
It's on actually. So, can you hear me now? Can you hear?
Yes.
Yeah, I think this is not bad. No, I would like to thank you again for joining us for this celebration and offering your views on in the scenario of education in India and internationally. Thank you again. Let's hope that we'll meet personally here in this institute again. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.